Warning: some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. What is the scariest experience you've had in your life that you believe can only be attributed to the paranormal? When I was like 3 or 4, my grandmother passed away, and soon after all of my extended family flew in town to have the funeral. A week after the funeral, some relatives were still in town, including my uncle and his family. My grandmother wanted us to sell the house after she passed, so my family did exactly that. It was hectic cause we were trying to pack everything up, meanwhile everyone still had to go to work and school. On one of the days that we had to pack up the house, my parents both had work, my older cousins had school, and my uncles and aunts had jobs/other stuff. However, my uncle, Grandma's oldest son, was available to watch me for a couple hours, so he did. According to him, I asked him to go to the bathroom while he was watching TV. The closest bathroom was in my grandparents' old room, so I went there. When I came back, I asked my uncle who the nice lady was on the bed. He kinda played along with it because he might have thought it was an imaginary friend or something. He asked me questions about her to entertain me. I described her as dark-haired, kinda white, and wearing a blue nightgown. When I said that, my uncle freaked out because my grandmother always wore a light blue nightgown to sleep. After that, my uncle and I left the house and waited outside for my parents to come back home. When I was about 8 and staying with a friend, I woke up from a dream that my dog died crying and asked to go home. This had never happened before and never happened again. The parents got me to go back to bed. I did, and in the morning when I got home my family were sitting silently in the living room. I found out that my dog was run over late the night before at the same time, or roundabout, I had the nightmare. I was so shocked that I couldn't even cry. I don't know what to think about it, but here it goes. Around 8 years ago I was in vacations with my parents and my cousin. My sister couldn't come as she had just started her first job, so she stayed home by herself. When we were children, both my sister and I used to be really close, mainly because we shared room for my first 7 nights years. We used to have our code with taps for asking things like, "Are you already asleep? Are they, our parents, sleep?" Stuff like that. She is also always doing something or looking for something to do, always being the first up. So when she was up and wanted me to wake up, she would place her face as close to mine as possible and stare at me. I don't know for how long she would stay like this, but I can clearly remember multiple times waking to her doing this. I, of course, would shout or at least panic until realizing it was her. I guess it was fun for her, and I have to admit, I also did it a couple of times. So now we are in our trip. It has been at least 10-12 years since the last time my sister pulled this prank on me. My sister and I are not as close as we used to be. We have certainly grown a little apart, but we still love each other. It was the last night in our trip before heading back to our city, and we had just found this nice hotel close to the pyramids in Palenque, which meant no cell phone service. We were sharing a room, my mom and dad in the first bed and my cousin and I in the other one. At some point around 4 a.m. I woke up to the same old sensation, that someone is staring at me, so I opened my eyes and I could clearly see a face. My immediate reaction was to shout, waking my mother up. I have to say that this sensation by itself is really scary, but years of experience with my sister waking me up like this took the threat away, so despite of my shouting I wasn't scared, it was just too familiar. My mom turned on the light and asked me what happened. I told her that I was pretty sure my sister had just woken me up. I know it didn't make any sense, but I felt it was her, though I cannot say I saw her face. I just saw a face and then it disappeared, immediately. My mom is really superstitious, so she couldn't sleep after that because she felt something was odd, and I couldn't sleep thinking of my sister. Later that day, in the morning, we noticed we all had lots of missed calls. My sister was involved in a really bad car accident. Luckily she only had minor injuries. To this day I don't know what to make out of this experience. My brain tells me it was just a coincidence. On the other hand, it's the only way I would have thought of my sister sleeping. It was just so real, so between both of us. As an extra, on our previous visit to Palenque, my parents, my sister and I, at the ruins we could hear some drums. My parents said that it was raining and we were playing with the ponds, and at some point the drums started playing. Our curiosity made us follow the sound, getting us deeper and deeper in the jungle. I can't remember why we stopped, but when we finally made it to the exit and asked the security guy about the music, he said, "So you heard the drums as well?" He then proceeded to tell us that a lot of people had heard them at different times and they didn't know the source of it. I woke up from a nap to the sound of my girlfriend sobbing somewhere else in the house. I got up to see what was wrong and determined the sound was coming from downstairs. I followed the sound down the spiral staircase all the way to the finished basement. The sound was definitely coming from the little half bath at the bottom of the stairs that we rarely used. The door was closed, which it never was, and I couldn't see any light under the door, but the sound was very loud from the bottom of the stairs. It was about this time that I started to fully wake up and remembered my girlfriend had been leaving for the grocery store when I was starting my nap. I could see her parking spot from one of the basement windows. She wasn't back yet. I called her name and the sobbing instantly stopped. The bathroom was empty when I finally got the courage to check. I was staying the night at a friend's house when I was about 13. We were watching The Shining with her older sister and another friend when I saw a black figure in my peripheral vision. I turned my head all the way to the right and watched this solid black figure in the shape of a man wearing a cowboy hat walk from one side of the house to the other. I didn't say anything to my friend when it happened. I thought maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me because the movie was scary. After the movie, my friend's sister and others all left the house to stay elsewhere. My friend's parents were out of town. In the middle of the night I woke up to someone stomping up the stairs toward the room we were sleeping in. We thought maybe her sister had just come home and ran upstairs to bed. We went to check and found no one. We heard the stomping a few more times, and then a really loud bang on the wall between our bedroom and the outside of the house, on the second story. My friend looks me straight in the eyes and says, "Did you see the man earlier?" I swear no one else was home and my friend was just as terrified as I was. We hid under the blankets and didn't come out until we could see sunlight. This isn't my only encounter with unexplained/paranormal things happening. My dad's house when I was a kid was scary to say the least, haunted if you believe in that kind of thing. We used to see a man in a military uniform in the long hallway leading towards my brother's room. The security alarms would go off for no reason, like someone was opening and closing a door over and over again. And one time we had a decorative plate fly off a shelf and hit a mirror clear across the room. When I was 10, my great-grandfather passed away. My great-grandmother wasn't used to being in the house alone, so my dad and I put an extra light fixture in the hallway for her. After we finished, I took an extension cord back down to the basement. I tossed it onto the table and began walking up the stairs. As I was climbing the steps I glanced to my right. Beneath the wall I saw a pair of legs dressed in slacks walking by the table I'd just left. I bolted, ran past my GMA and dad on my way out of the house. It was only the three of us there. I usually get home from work and leave the door unlocked for my roommate, who usually arrives at around the same time. Well, one day, I apparently had locked the door without thinking about it, which turned out to be a lifesaver. Our front door didn't have any windows or a peephole, so you can't see who is there. I was in my bedroom when I heard the doorbell ring. I thought it was my roommate who couldn't get in because I'd always leave the door unlocked. As I'm walking to open the door, I get this overwhelming feeling with chills that I should not open or unlock the door. It stopped me dead in my tracks. So as I'm standing on the other side of the doorbell starts just constantly ringing, and I can hear a guy singing and whistling on the other side. He starts knocking and finally tries turning the doorknob over and over. Now, on any given day, the door is usually unlocked, but that day for some reason I had locked it. As he's trying to open the door, I hear him yell, "I know you're in there, bitch. I can see your car in the driveway." He stands there for 5 or so minutes and leaves. Don't worry, I had called the police and apparently he had been running around my neighborhood doing this to random houses. But who knows what would have happened if I hadn't had that feeling of locking the door and then not opening it. A few years ago, the day before my birthday, I had a really weird dream. I was in my mother's kitchen with my mother, only there were no walls and just a dark expanse all around. I walked up to her and asked, "So, how did he die?" She replied, "He woke up dead." I woke up at that point, around 4:30 a.m. according to my phone, and wrote this down in my dream journal beside my bed, which I was keeping at the time in an attempt to spur lucid dreaming. It was not successful. My first lucid dream occurred entirely by accident 2 months ago. A few hours later, maybe after 8, after the sun was up, certainly, my brother called me, crying, to say that our Uncle S was dead. Apparently, my Aunt S woke up around 6 o'clock to wake him up for work as usual, only to find him blue-faced and cold in the bed next to her, choked on his vomit. This was a completely unexpected death. He had no medical conditions that would have worried my aunt, his sisters, or his mother, never mind the rest of the family. Even the autopsy came back inconclusive. They couldn't find any reason, medical, neurological, or chemical, as to why he suddenly puked in his sleep and didn't wake up from it, though my aunt did say that the coroners estimated he'd been dead 1 to 2 hours by the time she got up, right around the time I woke up from the woke up dead dream. I was either 13 or 14, home alone one evening before my parents got home from work. In my room watching TV when I hear the blinds from our patio door in the kitchen slightly move. I freak out and go take a look and notice them just stopping as I arrive. I am weirded out, but in my head I explain it as a current that passed in the house since our heating is on. As I'm heading back to the room, I hear a sharp thump sound as if something has fallen. I'm freaking out as I now think there is someone in the house, but I know there is no way they could have been in the kitchen and then my room without me noticing. I peek inside and see my baseball player statue that has a flat base laying sideways on my dresser. Somehow it got knocked over. I freaking run downstairs, put the TV on full blast as I didn't want to hear anything else, and wait terrified for my parents to get home. After that evening I never experienced anything freaky at all in that house. I had a dream when I was 3 years old about being chased through an old house by a man with a chainsaw. The aged green walls and wooden floors are still ingrained in my memory. My only escape was hopping from the second floor down to the first, where I was teleported back in bed with my parents. The particularly spooky part didn't come until years later. My family went on vacation for spring break to some town along the coast. We stayed in a home that was part of an older settlement in Washington state. Upon entering the house, I was freaking out. It was the exact home I had dreamed of years ago, right down to the walls and the staircase. I felt exceedingly uncomfortable for our entire stay. I read in a book a long while later that, unbeknownst to my parents, the neighborhood we were staying in is notably haunted due to some murders that took place there in the 1800s. When I was 18 and 8 months pregnant with our first child, I woke up in the middle of the night, completely frozen, with something telling me to move my head to the right, which was the direction my husband was laying, as well as having the crib for our soon-to-be little bit being on that side as well. There was a woman standing at the end of the bed, right between the crib and our bed. She put her finger up to her mouth, shushing me, and then touched my husband's face and hair, and gazed at the crib. She then proceeded to sit on my bed and cry while staring at the crib. I'm frozen the entire time, and then she just leaves, like goes out the door and leaves. Too scared to talk, I curl up to my husband and cry myself back to sleep. The next day I tell him what I experienced the night before, and while describing the woman he starts to tear up and I ask what's wrong. He goes and pulls out his family album. Come to find out he has an aunt who is rarely discussed. She was murdered by her husband when my husband was 9 years old. He was also her favorite while she was alive. Before him and I got together, he always said he never wanted to get married or have kids. My guess is that she just wanted to check the situation out, and was overcome with emotion about the growing he had done in his 24 years of life. I've seen her a few times since, mainly around the times when we are about to have a huge life shift, buying a house, having our second, etc., and our interactions have a totally different vibe now. She isn't threatening or intimidating anymore. You'll see her, she will nod, I will nod, and then she will keep observing things. Our oldest, 3-0, always talks about the lady that looks like Papa, and our youngest, 10-Mo, who is her namesake, is constantly playing with something that isn't there. Overall it's been a cool experience. 10/10 would be willingly haunted again. My grandmother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's when I was a teenager. After my grandfather died, she just kept getting sicker. My parents decided to move her in with us so we could keep a closer eye on her. A couple of months later, she accidentally fell and broke her hip. My dad rushed her to the hospital and I stayed home with my mom. My grandmother used to sit in the same spot all day, a big comfy chair in the middle of the living room. At night, after my dad rushed my grandmother to the hospital, I walked through the living room and saw a shadow, a black silhouette of a large man standing behind the big chair. I jumped from fright, and as soon as I took my eyes off of it, it was gone. I thought it was just my imagination, so I brushed it off and ran back to my room. A couple of hours later, I was in my room and my mom was in the living room watching TV when I suddenly heard her scream bloody murder. I ran to the living room. Her hand was on her chest and she was heaving, her eyes were nearly bulging out. I asked her if she was okay and she said, "I could have sworn I saw your father standing behind that chair." Needless to say, my dad and my grandfather looked eerily alike. I grew up in a haunted house, so spooky things happened all the time, and the absolute scariest thing that ever happened unfortunately happened about once a week. If you were sitting in our living room, you could see straight down our hallway to my bedroom door. It was pretty dark at the end of the hall, but you could usually make out my doorway and the doors on either side and the pictures and things hanging on the wall. When the dark came, however, it was like someone dropped a black curtain over the end of the hall. You could still see about halfway down the hall, but beyond that you might as well be looking into a black hole. When the dark came, it was always accompanied by this intense, uncomfortable feeling of being watched. Our family's 3 dogs would stare down the hallway and growl, and occasionally one of them would get brave enough to walk a little way down the hall, but they always came backing slowly out like they were afraid to turn their back on the dark. After a little while, usually a few minutes to half an hour, the darkness would suddenly disappear and you could see again. Sometimes, however, it would linger all night, and since nobody wanted to walk through the dark to get to the bedrooms, my whole family would be stuck in the living room all night. To add some details and clarify a few points, since people seem interested. The first few times it happened we did turn on the hall light to try to see what was down there, but as soon as we turned it off the dark came back. In 4 lols, that's what happens when you turn off the light. The dark came pretty frequently, once a week or so. It was rare that the dark lingered more than a few minutes. It was easier to just wait 5 minutes before going down the hall than it was to muster the courage to charge headfirst into the dark. We only got stuck in the living room all night maybe 2 or 3 times. And it wasn't like we were huddled there in fear, we all just sort of passed out in front of the TV waiting for the dark to lift. Probably we could have just turned on the light and ran for our rooms, but as an 11-year-old girl I certainly wasn't brave enough to try it. As for everyone wondering why we didn't just move, well, it was our home. Moving is difficult and expensive, and honestly it wasn't worth it. Understand, weird stuff happened every day, but it was mostly little things that were easy to ignore. The really scary stuff was rare and not enough to send us packing. Back when I just started working in a new town, my best friend was studying at uni one town over. We met once a week in the cinema in her town to the sneak preview. One night after the film was over, we said our goodbyes and I hurried to my car to drive home. When I rolled off the parking lot, I was hit by the thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to take the country road home instead of the highway? I shook my head, wondering where that thought came from, because taking that way would at least double the time I needed to go home and I had to go to work early next morning. So I headed towards the highway anyway. I'd never been scared of driving before or after that night, but I was almost shaking with fright when I rolled onto the highway. The road was quite empty, but eventually I closed up to a truck. On any normal day I'd just overtake it, but I couldn't bring myself to do so. Somehow the truck meant safety to me. Thoughts crossed my mind about what the last thoughts of people getting hit by wrong-way drivers are. Again, no idea where they came from. Right before I reached my exit a wrong-way driver passed us by. As of today I have not found a logical reason for my fear that night. I didn't listen to the radio, I had a CD playing. There wasn't music or radio in the cinema as well and it was well before the time of smartphones. Something or someone warned me. For several years I experienced what is commonly called sleep paralysis. The first experience was one of the most terrifying. I was taking a nap on Christmas Day. I had the common experience of a visceral buzzing in my ear/head, and a feeling of terrible evil coming upon me. I awoke, but couldn't open my eyes or move a muscle. I then felt someone grab onto my feet, and start crawling up my body. I felt completely overcome with evil. Finally I pushed it all back and opened my eyes, and found myself alone. Similar experiences happened for years, each was terrifying, but almost became commonplace. I discovered that it was sleep paralysis, and someone said the best way to deal with it was to give in to it and not to fight it. One day, I was taking a nap on my bed in the basement. My brother was a couple rooms down in our entertainment room. I felt that familiar visceral buzzing, my eyes opened, but I couldn't move. I decided to let go this time and I gave into it. As soon as I had done that, my body started to sit up. I saw my arm rising, and one thought dominated my mind. I had to kill my brother. I was halfway up, and panic set in and I pushed back as hard as I could, and eventually woke up panting and terrified. I never gave into it again. It's lessened over the past few years, but every year or so it will come back. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily videos, and join the Spooky Squad.